This video is going to be about training volume. Now obviously it's a very broad subject and would require a very lengthy and comprehensive video to break down properly. So what I'm going to look at is specifically how to program in multiple sets on a given exercise within a training session. Now, as simple as it seems, it's something that I think lifters tend to get wrong, and oftentimes the additional sets they may do has a tendency to turn into junk volume or not very meaningful work. So I'm going to assume that you're happy with your current training split. You don't really want to add in any more training frequency, and you're not really keen on the idea of spreading out your volume over a number of training sessions. You just want to go in for that session and perform more sets on a given exercise, to go from maybe one working set to 2, 3, 4 or more. You want to explore the possibilities of high volume training in its simplest form. So how are you going to do this? Well, I'm going to present 4 methods to you, very simple. We're going to look at the pros and cons of each one and the progressive overload that you could use within this system. Now, for those of you that have seen my content before, you may have realised that I'm predominantly a low volume advocate. Now, it's not because I believe it to be inherently better than higher volume, on the contrary, but it's definitely easier to adhere to. It's easier to manage a progressive overload. Given the current lifestyle that we lead, time is an issue, and it kind of pays to create sessions that are shorter, and that's going to mean that you're going to err on the side of lower volume. And consistently your baseline kind of training protocol needs to be at a certain level to match your worst week, really. What's the least amount of time that you might have available during a week, and then kind of go from there. And if more time kind of comes up, you can then experiment with maybe adding in more work and playing around with volume, because there's definitely merit to it. Through personal experience and working with clients, there's definite progress to be made by manipulating the volume. Now, if you're interested in reading about topics like this and lots of other subjects I don't cover in video format, then feel free to check out my email newsletter, Natural Gains. You can sign up with the link in the description box down below. All you've got to do is pop in your email. Okay, so it's Monday, you've got push day, you're going to go into the gym, do some bench press, and we've got maybe 10 to 15 minutes extra time that you can utilise for the next few weeks. So we want to increase the volume on the bench, really work on that. So you decide to do 3 sets as opposed to 1. And we can use that example across the 4 methods here. So the first method, really simple. It's tried and tested. It's used within programs like the starting strength, the strong lifts, stuff like that. And I'm using it in my programming at the moment to great effect. Now, it ties very closely into the double progression scheme, the overload system, whereby you need to increase your reps before then the weight. So the method essentially has you working at the same weight across the number of sets that you've decided to do. So in this case, 3 sets. The weight needs to be the same for each set. And you're going to be working towards a rep target or a rep range or a specific rep that you need to do, rather than working to failure. Now, this isn't really used in bodybuilding much these days. It's more powerlifting, but it's extremely effective. So let's assume that you can do 8 reps at 80 kilos on the bench. Well, we're going to start off with a target of 3 sets of 7, for example, and you can use any rep range that you want at 80 kilos. Now, the first set is quite easy. Obviously, you can do 8 reps, so you're actually going to have to hold back, and that then plays into the cons, which I'll explain later. Now, depending on the rest period, you might be able to kind of maintain that for longer, or you might drop off in reps. The rest period is up to you to decide, depending on the time you have available. So let's assume that you get 7 reps just about on that second set, but it's a lot harder. You're now at 10 RPE, for example. Definitely couldn't have got 8 reps. And that's where you get to those really hard reps. You have to be patient with this style of volume arrangement to get to those hard, really kind of rewarding reps, where you get a good pump, very stimulative. So now you rest again onto the third set, but you only managed 6. So you haven't successfully reached the target that you were aiming for. That means you've got to do it again next week. And you do it again and again until you hit 3 by 7. Only then do you increase the weight. Again, then the increment is up to you to decide. I'd recommend something small. And then you just cycle through the protocol in that manner. Now, one of the reasons why this method is so effective is that it promotes patience. You're going to be working at a weight more than likely for quite some time, and you really have to earn that progression. your body truly does adapt to that weight before then you take it up. So you do away with a lot of the egotistical overzealousness of load increases that some of the other methods promote. That also plays into the cons because it can be a little bit boring, it can be a little bit monotonous, and you do need to hold back on those first few sets, especially if you're doing more sets. You might want to do 5 sets, for example. Those first 1 or 2 sets, especially if you're doing maybe moderate to high rep ranges, will be quite easy. You're waiting for those harder reps to come as you push through the sets and get towards the end. It's a little bit easier to kind of maintain your rep target when using low reps, but needless to say, it requires a certain level of discipline, and you may need to hold back and kind of prevent yourself from going to that level that you might want to go or be used to reaching during a set. Those tough reps where you get that really good pump and that satisfaction from completing a hard set. So it's super effective. It does require a lot of patience to use effectively. Now for the next method, it's pretty much the opposite of what I've just highlighted. Again, we're going to be working at a fixed weight throughout the 3 sets, but this time we're aiming for a prescribed level of intensity or effort. So for instance, we could go to positive failure on some movements, or maybe 1 rep left in reserve, or 9 RP, however you want to arrange it. It has to be consistent. You have to determine that before you start the program. So we're not worried about rep ranges, we're just going all out. Now for that first set, obviously performance is going to be good. So for example, we'll go back to the 80k bench press example. This time you do 8 reps. Now for the second and third set, there's going to be a depreciation of reps there because of the fatigue incurred by going harder on that first set. Now that will be exacerbated by shorter rest periods. Now let's say, for example, that second set we drop straight down to 6 reps. So 8 and then 6. And then the third set we might hit 5 or 6 again, depending on how hard that 6 was. So there's definitely some drop off in reps, which is hard to manage from an overload perspective. It's also kind of hard to deal with mentally when you consider that progress on the first set might actually decrease your performance on the second and third set. Especially important to remember when you haven't seen any paper progress on that first set. For example, week 1 to week 2, you're not quite strong enough, you haven't gained quite enough strength to see 9 reps. But the 8th rep is perhaps a little bit faster than the week before, and maybe the first 1 to 3 reps were definitely quicker and easier, but you're not really picking up on that. To the uninitiated lifter, they're not really aware of these things. You've really got to pay attention to this. So on paper, week 1, week 2, both 8 reps. So already that's kind of disappointing. Now on week 2, you go into that second set and you actually do 1 rep less than you did last week because of the increase in fatigue from pushing just that little bit more on that first set. So that looks like a massive failure to you. That's really going to kind of mess up your psychology with this particular method of volume arrangement. Also, the second and third sets, because of the depreciation of reps that you're doing, because of the fatigue from that first set, assuming that you're going hard, feels almost like a waste of time. You don't really feel like you get much out of it because of the quality of that first set. I guess the positives of this would be that you see really rapid progression, on that first set. It's certainly easier and quicker to see than the first method, whereby you have to increase the reps, then the sets, over the multiple sets. With this, you can just use mini plates to kind of go up every single week if you wanted. And certainly rep improvements are going to be quicker weekly to maybe bi-weekly, depending on the reps you're doing, maybe thrice weekly. But it's certainly going to be quicker than the first method. And you're getting straight to the point. With that first set, you're getting straight stuck in there to those really, really hard reps that you think, are very satisfying, very rewarding reps. You're going to get a great pump from that first set. And that's kind of the sensation that you want, whereas the first method, you have to wait for that. So that's a big pro of this method. Now, method 3 is very similar to the method that I've just outlined, but perhaps a little bit more well thought out and sensible. Now, it would be the same premise for the first set. So you go to a pre-arranged level of effort. Generally speaking, it's going to be to either positive failure or just shy of it. So absolutely sure that you're not going to be able to complete the next rep. That's kind of where I like to be. But for the second and third set, you're going to drop that weight off a little bit by a predetermined amount. So for example, you could manage 8 reps again on the 80k bench, but for the second and third set, you utilise 75. Now that drop off coincides with that increase in fatigue from that first set, so that you kind of equal out and perform 8 reps. So it could look something like 8 at 80, 8 at 75, 7 at 75, something like that. So the volume is, or the reps per set are kind of equal. So of course, by allowing the weight to drop off a little bit on those subsequent sets, we're doing away with some of the hardships faced during perhaps method 2, whereby we're annihilated and crushed by attempting to lift the same weight that we did for that first set. There's no way that we can match reps, and that's psychologically sometimes a little bit difficult to deal with. This method allows for you to be able to repeat a similar number of reps for those 3 sets. Now it's up to you to pick the right weight to drop off. You could even drop the weight off a little bit more and kind of focus a little bit more on form. Slow the tempo down, perhaps add a pause maybe during those second and third sets, really trying to iron out the form and prevent yourself from getting carried away with that first set too much. So really with this method, again, much like method 2, it's all about that top set, that first set, seeing progression on paper with that. That being said, it is kind of a little bit more complex to navigate through your progressive overload. How do we work on those second and third sets in terms of the overload? How do we do that when we're seeing progression on that first set? It's more complex to manage than the first method for sure. Thanks for watching this late into the video, guys. I just want to take a few seconds of your time to remind you that I offer online coaching. It's only £20 a week. It's a fully comprehensive and personalised coaching experience designed to take you from either a beginner level physique to an intermediate, or as an intermediate to an advanced. There's no contract, there's money back guarantee. It really is a very high quality service that I do take a lot of pride in. So check out my website, the link is in the description box below, all the relevant information is there. So going into the fourth and final method of volume arrangement. Now of course there are many different ways of doing this, but these are the main 4 that I've decided to talk about in this video. Now this one involves the use of advanced training techniques. How can we squeeze in more volume without the extra time expense? Let's say you've only got an extra 3, 4, 5 minutes to spend in the gym for this session going forwards. We can use drop sets and rest pause to allow for more potential volume with very, very small time commitment. So we use the 80k bench as an example, and we'll start with drop sets. Let's say you perform 8 reps again at 80 kilos. Now you want to set a predetermined drop for that first set, and you can do a number of drops, however many that you feel that you have time for. I'd recommend no more than 2, and you want the reps to be probably a third to maybe half of what you're doing for that top set. Any more, it really just turns into an exercise of stamina really, and endurance. So for example, 80k for 8, then you could maybe drop to 70k and you might get 3 to 5, then again to 60, 62 and a half, and you might get again 3, 4, 5 reps. That's kind of how I would manage it, and that's a really good way of getting to those difficult reps more quickly, albeit with a lighter load, but it's still very difficult reps. Now the second method, rest pause, probably a little bit more effective in my opinion. We're essentially fast forwarding through the set to get to those stimulative difficult reps that would usually be at the end of the second and third set, and we're going straight to them. So we're foregoing those easy reps at the beginning of a set. For example, on that second set, those first 4 reps might be quite easy. Well, we're doing away with that. We're cutting the rest period down and getting straight to those difficult reps. Now, the rest period that you choose is completely up to you. It's going to be between probably 10 and 30 seconds. With more rest, the higher the reps will be. With less rest, the lower the initial reps will be. But essentially, it's a really, really effective way of squeezing in more volume. So for example, the 80k bench, okay, again, using that example, 8 reps performed to more or less positive failure. You then rest for, let's say, 20 seconds, and you then perform another 3. You then rest for another 20 seconds, and you might perform 1 to 2. So they're really effective, really difficult reps. They're not easy reps, because we've mitigated the easy part of the set by reducing that rest period. So total, we're looking at over 10 to 12 reps for that same weight. Whereas if we're only doing one set, it'd be stuck at 8. So it's kind of a quirky way of trying to increase the volume, both drop sets and rest pause. Again, there's lots of variables to play within, these advanced techniques that will make it more or less effective for you. Positives is that it doesn't take much time at all to be able to set up. The negatives potentially is that it's kind of quite complex. It's very, very difficult, and you might be in a scenario where if you don't get the weight quite right or the rest period quite right, you might be in a situation where you unexpectedly fail a rep or do significantly less or more than you would expect and kind of waste the set. So it has to be really on point with your targeting and your arrangement of that particular protocol. You really need to kind of use trial and error to ascertain where you need to be exactly for that particular advanced technique. And that comes with practice and time. But yeah, really, really good methods to utilize to increase the volume to some extent at least with a minimal time expense. That's pretty much the video, guys. Got 4 methods there of how to arrange your volume within a given session for a particular exercise. And obviously it's a very simplified look at this, very condensed. If you wanted me to talk more in depth about these kind of subjects, let me know in the comment section below. Hopefully it was helpful and you enjoyed it. And any ideas about any future videos, and again, just leave them in the comments. I'll be happy to get back to you guys. As a reminder, don't forget I offer online coaching exclusively for natural lifters. I have a free newsletter called Natural Gains, where I send out emails once every 1 or 2 weeks. Thanks for watching again. Stay strong.